Dad, what were the things that you loved about radio? Why was it so special to you?
Well, I can think of three words that probably sums it up pretty well. Intimacy, immediacy, and imagination. Intimacy, I mean by that the ability that you have as a radio presenter to talk to people in the most intimate way. It could be an old lady dying in the hospital and there's a radio in her ear, and you have the enormous privilege of being able to speak to her when probably no one else in the family even can, in a way that is quite irreplaceable. The immediacy is where radio can be on the spot to describe something which is happening, where you don't need much equipment, you don't need a television camera and all the cables and God knows what. You can be there on the spot describing something. A good example there is the Hindenburg arriving, the German airship arriving in America. And the commentator is describing it quite excitedly and calmly.
Standing still now, they've dropped ropes out of the nose of the ship.
And bringing you the whole picture, and then the Hindenburg explodes. And the change in his description is quite unbelievable. He goes completely to pieces.
I can't talk, ladies and gentlemen. Honest, it's just laying down massive fucking wreckage.
Is overcome entirely with emotion. Emotion just takes hold of him in a way that I haven't ever heard before or since. It's indescribable. It's very moving, and I've listened to it dozens of times, and I always feel the same emotion. When you think of putting plays on, in television terms, you have to build sets, go to an enormous amount of expense. On radio, you don't have to have any sets. People make their own pictures on radio. You can say on radio it was a dark and stormy night, and every person listening has an immediate picture in their mind, their own version, if you like, of a dark and stormy night. But again, that comes to the point of imagination. Everybody has a different picture.
I can remember when I was a kid going into the ABC, and I remember the sound effects studio and the Foley studio. That was a big part of bringing those plays and other things to life, wasn't it?
Wonderful. The old coconut shells for a horse clip-clopping. The sound effects bloke would have two halves of coconut shells and just clip-clop them together, and it sounded exactly like a horse. And if they wanted a sound effect of a bushfire, if you recorded a bushfire, it sounded like anything but a bushfire. But the answer to that came with getting a piece of cellophane paper and slowly crumbling it or squeezing it near a microphone, and it sounded exactly like flames in a bushfire. And again, that's imagination.
It's funny because as a child as well, I distinctly remember we would go to Bridgetown and stay with my grandmother, your mother-in-law, and I can remember the Blue Hills theme coming on the radio and how instantly, as a listener, even as a kid, you were transported to that place and to those characters.
Blue Hills was a phenomenon written by a lady named Gwen Meredith. It ran for God knows how many episodes. It seemed endless. But it captivated Australia in a way that I don't think anything else ever has. From farmers' wives, this again, remote properties in the bush, to city ladies listening. And if you interrupted their listening to Blue Hills, you were in trouble. And my mother would be passionately listening. She was a country girl, and Blue Hills to her was just like reading some sort of Bible on the radio, I think.
I also remember the voices from my childhood as well, in particular great sporting commentators like Alan McGilvray and Lindsay Hassett listening to the cricket. They truly were the sounds of summer, weren't they, in Australia?
Totally. As a child of 10, my real interest in radio began, and I can almost remember the moment it began. The two great newsreaders of those days during the war, and when I was 10, it was 1941, so the war was at its height, almost anyway, and the two newsreaders on the ABC were Don Chadwick and Don Sanderson. And in later life, when I worked in Brisbane, I met Don Sanderson, and it was like, to me, it was like meeting God. But their voices were so authoritative, and you felt some sort of comfort, even though terrible things were happening around the world, that these two voices could reassure you in a strange way that everything eventually was going to be all right.
And then over the years, there were remarkable people like James Dibble as well. Those New South Wales listeners would remember his name in particular.
Oh, very much. John Chance's fame lies in a bulletin he was reading. And instead of saying a woman was bitten on the finger by a funnel-web spider, which is a true story in Sydney, he said the woman was bitten on a funnel by a finger-web spider, and that became famous.
There was such a joy as well, in particular for me, going into the ABC record library in Perth when I was a kid. It was a real treasure trove, wasn't it?
Oh, amazing. There were thousands of records, and I remember the record library was quite near the studios, which was ideal because you didn't have to go far if you had to run and get a record, which I did on many occasions. While one record was playing on air, you were running into the record library to get something that somebody wanted to hear, and you'd run back. But somebody suggested that the record library should be moved into another part of the building. And one of the blokes at this meeting said, well, you know what had happened, don't you? And everyone said, no, the building would collapse because the weight of all the records in the record library had to be placed in part of the building that was reinforced. And if the records were all moved to another part of the building, the whole place would fall down.
Over the years, and then when you retired from broadcasting and from radio in particular, you didn't want to retire, but your condition at the time, spasmodic dysphonia, ended up forcing your hand there. Did you enjoy imparting your knowledge and expertise and skills onto your students at Edith Cowan University?
Oh, it was wonderful. Just marvellous. Michael Usher, I suppose, is the best known nationally example of one of my ex-students. And, it was delightful to be able to do that. It was not a case of really just telling them your experiences, but trying to encourage them in a number of areas to be themselves, to imagine they were talking to one person instead of a large audience of people. And that's one of the keys to radio, I think, to be yourself. I even said to them, look, put a photograph, if you like, near the microphone of somebody whom you're fond of, and just talk to them as though you're talking to your mother or your best friend at home. And that seemed to work for many of them. And I think that's the essence of radio, just being able to talk as though you're talking to someone at home.
In the interests of network balance, we should make a shout out here to Georgie Gardner on 9 as well, perhaps.
That's right. Dear Georgie, wonderful person. She was such a warm, wonderful person to listen to on radio and television, very much herself, and no changes in her personality or delivery, just Georgie Gardner talking to you.
Maybe another I word we can use is impact when it comes to radio, because there is a famous story about Orson Welles in the 1930s, isn't there?
Amazing, wonderful.
Do you want to explain that to us?
Yeah, that a play written by H.G. Wells, funnily enough, no relation to Orson Welles, their names were spelled differently, but it was a play called War of the Worlds, and it was related to beings from Mars invading the Earth. Part of it was a radio commentator describing what was happening in, I think, New York.
I can see it now. It's a white handkerchief tied to a pole, flag of truce.
With these amazing machines from Mars suddenly appearing on Earth, and people running in panic and getting in cars. And in fact, being a radio broadcast, it was so realistic that many people in parts of America, and particularly New York, packed belongings frantically in a panic-stricken way into their cars, started to head to somewhere where they thought they might be safe. And the power of that still is one of the great mysteries of radio, I think, and the realistic presentation.
I can remember when you had your jazz and big band show, a wonderful track that was the opening track which you chose for that show, the theme, if you like, was Tommy Dorsey's Opus 1.
that still runs through my mind. The other thing, wonders of radio, I suppose, or one of the wonders of radio among many, is the ability just to tune into something like Tommy Dorsey or Glenn Miller or Frank Sinatra, and immediately you can see them in your mind. Oh, that's such a powerful part of radio, I think.
I know that when you stopped the jazz and big band show, you weren't entirely happy with the situation with the ABC, but they handed you the country show in the 1970s. And what memories do you have of bringing country music to the people of WA and the huge success that your show had?
I happened to be on holiday when there were 5 announcers chosen. I was one of them to present on 5 nights of the week a different sort of music. And when I got back to work, I was left with the proposition of, what about this? No, that's taken. And I thought, well, okay, what about country music? Or country and western, as it was known then. The manager was rather perturbed at the fact that a television newsreader was going to be on radio playing hillbilly music, and he didn't see the two sitting happily together. But anyway, it happened, and it went on to become the top rating or the most listened to evening program in Perth for quite some time.
Over the years, there were some very funny names of ABC managers in particular, and I remember Talbot Duck Manton, who you used to speak about a bit.
Wonderful. He was a wonderful bloke in many ways, a very good broadcaster, and he was a rather shy man in many ways, but he was conducting a meeting in Sydney. Well, the ABC did this now and again. They'd get a number of listeners in and ask them their opinions of radio and what they thought about the ABC and all that sort of thing. And one old lady kept calling him Mr. Manton, Mr. Manton this and Mr. Manton that. And he said, look, my name is Talbot Duck Manton. And she said, I couldn't possibly call you Duck. It sounds like someone out of the Goon Show.
The Goon Show in particular, I can remember, was played on Saturdays on ABC Radio in Perth, probably around the country as well. Those days are definitely gone, aren't they? But that was an institution.
Things will change, and they'll continue to change. They always have. The effect of things like the Goon Show, nobody had ever heard anything like that. And that sort of humour was so appealing. It was crazy. It was unpredictable. People would mimic phrases out of the Good Show, phrases like needle, noddle, new. And all those sort of crazy phrases were wonderful in their time.
The last question I would have then is, what kind of advice do you give to people who are wishing to get into radio? What I find is that sometimes my mouth runs ahead of my brain, and it takes a long time for my brain to catch up. What advice do you give to young people in particular starting out in radio?
One thing is to gain as much general knowledge as you possibly can. Read newspapers, listen to news bulletins, as many as you can. Learn how to pronounce places in different languages. If you come across an Italian city and you haven't seen it before, do learn the rules of pronunciation of Italian, German, Russian, French. Practice just being yourself. Don't talk too quickly, because leaving a pause in radio can be as effective as something you just said. Give people time to absorb what you've said and think about it for a second or two before you continue. People like conversational people on radio who give them time to listen and think.
Thank you so much, Dad. You brought a lot of joy to a lot of people over many years. It's been lovely talking to you here and now.
I probably brought quite a bit of annoyance to some people too, which is good.
Well, we'll direct all the callers to you, okay? All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Pa. Okay, bye now.